Today, we're diving into a really fascinating what-if, a version of history where the two most powerful dark wizards of the 20th century didn't end up as rivals, but as allies. Let's explore what could have been. So, let's get right into it. The main question here is pretty straightforward, but wow, the ripple effects are huge. What actually happens if Gellert Grindelwald and Lord Voldemort team up? It's a terrifying thought for sure, but it's the how and the when that really make this a chilling possibility. Now, a lot of people imagine Voldemort at the peak of his power strolling into Nurmagard to recruit an old, imprisoned Grindelwald. But let's just get this out of the way right now. That version of the story, it just doesn't fly. It would never happen. And here's why that late-stage alliance is a total non-starter. First, Voldemort's ego is just way too big. He thought of himself as the absolute pinnacle of magic. There's no way he'd ask a washed-up, defeated wizard for help. Plus, he'd be paranoid that Grindelwald's whole greater good thing could create a rival faction within his own ranks. But honestly, the biggest reason is that the men they became were just too different. The older Grindelwald in his cell actually felt remorse. Voldemort, he only ever cared about himself and his own immortality. So we're looking at this all wrong. The truly terrifying scenario isn't a meeting between two old wizards. No, the real danger is an alliance forged when Grindelwald was at the absolute height of his power and a young, brilliant, and incredibly ambitious Tom Riddle was just starting to rise. So let's dig into that. First up, a dangerous possibility. We're going to look at the ideological overlap that could have made this whole nightmare a reality. If you look at their core philosophies, they seem different at first glance, right? On one hand, you've got Grindelwald. His mission was ideological. He wanted to completely reshape the world for the greater good, no matter how twisted that idea became. And on the other hand, you've got Voldemort. His mission was purely personal. He used all that blood purity rhetoric as a means to an end, his own personal power. Different starting points, but as we're about to see, they were heading to a very, very similar destination. Because despite those differences, look at the common ground. Both of them completely rejected the idea of Muggle equality. Both believed in a strict magical hierarchy, and neither of them blinked at using extreme violence to get what they wanted. So, for a young and opportunistic Tom Riddle, Grindelwald's movement, which was already built on these exact ideas, would have looked like the perfect vehicle for his own ambition. And that brings us to the next big question. Was there actually a time when they could have realistically met? Oh yeah, there was a perfect, terrifying window in history. Just look at the dates. While Grindelwald is tearing through Europe, a young Tom Riddle is at Hogwarts. But he's not just some schoolboy. By 1943, when he was only 16, he had already opened the Chamber of Secrets and created his first Horcrux. He was a patient, powerful, and deeply calculating wizard long before Grindelwald's reign ever came to an end. So, how do they meet? You can just picture it, can't you? A power-obsessed Riddle seeks out the most dominant wizard on the planet. He wouldn't show up at a rally like some screaming fanatic. No, he'd be the calm, intelligent one in the back, whose sharp mind and obvious talent would immediately get him noticed. Grindelwald, who always had an eye for talent, would see him not just as a follower, but as a potential asset. And that right there is the key to their entire partnership. It would never, ever be about trust. Grindelwald was way too smart to be fooled by Riddle's charm. He'd see the ambition, he'd see the danger, but he would also see a uniquely powerful tool. Their alliance would be one of pure, cold utility. And when your whole alliance is based on cold utility, it means Riddle isn't just taking orders. He's there to make the machine more efficient. And his presence would have an immediate, massive impact, reshaping Grindelwald's movement from something theatrical into something truly strategic. Think about it. In our timeline, Grindelwald's war was allowed. It was all about mass rallies, grand gestures, big visible symbols. But with Riddle whispering in his ear, the entire strategy shifts. It becomes less about spectacle and more about subtlety. The new goal is a quiet, insidious takeover of ministries and institutions, spreading their ideology through policy, not just through public fear. And this changes everything for Riddle's personal history. You know those missing years after Hogwarts where he disappeared to experiment with dark magic? They're gone, wiped from the timeline. Instead, he spends his formative years learning how to run a global movement from the inside out, playing on a European stage from a very young age. Which leads us to maybe the single biggest change in this entire alternate history, delaying the duel. That legendary 1945 showdown between Dumbledore and Grindelwald, In this world, it doesn't happen. At least, not yet. To get why, you have to remember why the duel happened in our timeline. Grindelwald's attacks became so public, so horrifying, that the wizarding world basically forced Dumbledore to step in. His war created this undeniable tipping point. But in this new, stealthier timeline, there is no big fiery moment. The movement's growth is systemic, it's bureaucratic. There's no one event that makes Dumbledore's intervention necessary. I mean, how exactly do you fight a duel against a new piece of legislation, or against a ministry that's been quietly taken over from within? You can't. And the result? Instead of collapsing in 1945, the late 40s and 50s see Grindelwald's vision become reality. We're talking about wizarding superiority becoming actual law. Gradual restrictions on muggles, magical committees overseeing muggle governments, it all just becomes the new normal, woven into the fabric of everyday life. But come on, we all know Tom Riddle. He was never, ever going to be number 2 forever. Which brings us to our final act, the successor's rise. This is the long game. So all this time, while Riddle is publicly playing the part of the loyal lieutenant, he's privately playing a completely different game. He's making more Horcruxes, and he's building his own secret inner circle, the Proto-Death Eaters, who are loyal only to him. And his final move? It's genius in a terrifying way. He engineers the very confrontation he helped delay, finally pushing his 2 greatest rivals, Dumbledore and Grindelwald, into a battle where no matter who wins, he comes out on top. And so, the legendary duel finally takes place in 1960, a full 15 years later. By this point, a whole generation has grown up knowing nothing but Grindelwald's world order. And here's the absolute kicker. The outcome of the duel itself? It's exactly the same. Dumbledore wins, Grindelwald is defeated. But this time, it doesn't end the war, because the movement isn't about one man anymore. It's a system, it's an institution, and it's just sitting there, waiting for a new leader to step out of the shadows. And that is the ultimate consequence of this whole thing. In our history, Grindelwald's defeat gave the world a breather, almost 30 years of relative peace before Voldemort rose. But in this timeline, there is no lull, there is no reset button. The war that Grindelwald started never actually ends. The first Wizarding War isn't a new conflict, it's just the next, deadlier phase. So Voldemort doesn't rise from the shadows to start a war. He simply inherits one. He steps into a world that's already broken, a world that's been conditioned for years to accept his brand of rule. And that just leaves us with one last, chilling thought. A new war doesn't begin, it just enters its next phase. What happens next?